Yeah, right. And the point is just that a perfectly good being, you'd think, should embody both of these two principles, but like you can't have both of them to the max kind of thing. So you've got to somehow explain how you've got more of one, say it's more loving and less just, or something more merciful and less just, say. You've just got this weird explanation and this weird asymmetry in your God concept, and like, why is it like that? So, it's if not like, I mean, you could say it just like makes the omni God concept incoherent in itself. That seems a bit strong, but I guess you could put it like that.
Yeah, at least there's a tension.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even you're the way you spun the problem of justice in and of itself in the context of Jesus, I think it's very compelling. I mean, I think it's very hard.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, well, obviously you do. You're biased. No, but seriously, I actually really liked it.
Good.
Maybe like is the wrong word. I found it very compelling.
Good. Thank you.
I'm kind of a fan of justice. Is John ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Was that Alex Malpass by any chance?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Hang on.
Hello?
Let me try. Yeah, are you Alex Malpass?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, hi again.
Hi again.
Okay.
How are you doing?
So have they told you about this argument?
Well, briefly, yeah, we just had a little bit of a discussion about it.
So it's a semantic situation. So I make distinctions between deserved and merit. And the way it is like, there's like in virtue of, deserve in virtue of what? Merit in virtue of what? The way I understand merit is always in virtue of one's actions, right? Deserve can be in virtue of one's actions, but not necessarily so. So the example would be like my friend Johnny Haas. His son deserves to be at his table, not in virtue of his son's actions, but in virtue of who he is based upon the actions of Johnny. Then he can never merit the seat at the table. So it's a case that he can never merit it because merit is implicitly understood as based upon one's own actions. And so, does he deserve to be at the table? Well, yes, in one sense, in virtue of him being Johnny's son, but no, in a sense, in virtue of his own actions. So that's how I would start.
Okay. So deserve is the like hereditary one, and merit is the earned one.
No, it's not
Is it the other way
necessarily not necessarily hereditary. In other words, one can deserve it based upon their own actions, but not necessarily so. In merit, it must necessarily be based upon one's own.
Okay. So what happens next?
I don't know. Given that, where's the argument? Where's the P in that P?
So I think the way the argument, I thought you were leading somewhere with some definitions and we were going somewhere, but I think if the way I'm understanding the argument is that what justice means is that each person kind of gets what they deserve, what they're owed.
Based upon their action, correct.
Well, in this case, the notion of deservedness is moral, right? So it just means that it ought to be. So like if justice meant giving you £5, then we would say that.
Because if a person deserves heaven and a person deserves hell, right? It's a case that you're saying that that a person ought to go to hell and a person ought to go, that they should. I mean, I had this discussion with a person by the name of Danny Philtalk, and he was trying to assign normativity to. So his argument was such that one deserves hell, One deserves hell. He ought to go to hell. God does not send him to hell. God does what he ought not do. God is not good. That's kind of an argument,
Okay.
which I pretty much was able to expose because he's equivocating in terms of, I don't know if equivocation is the right word, sir, but he's trying to say that deserve has an entailment of ought, and I believe that's what you're doing right now.
Well, I'm saying to you that the way this argument works is that it just starts off with this notion of like moral deservedness. I mean, that's just like the beginning of the argument. Are you saying you don't think there is a notion of moral deservedness?
Well, like for example, if the person goes to hell, they deserve it. If a person goes to heaven, they deserve it. And God, as the arbiter of the one who ordains such an act, because dependent upon God's actions and arbitration and so forth and mercy, they ought to go to hell. Different person ought to go to heaven. And so, it is good.
Well,
So where's the problem there?
listen, but let's not just, to begin with, let's just think about the concept of moral deservedness in a more humdrum case rather than jumping straight to the money shot where we're talking about how it works in theology. Just straightforwardly speaking, there are cases where, like, if I punched you in the face for no reason, someone would say, he ought not have done that, right? It's not good. It's bad for me to have done that, right? All those types of expressions about
Maybe one says he ought to have done it because he was defending himself.
Right. Okay. And in either case, what we would be doing would be saying simple, like, value ascriptions about the actions that we're doing and saying that this is good, this is bad, he ought to do this, he ought not do that. Right.
Okay, so based upon God's judgment, based upon God's
But
mercy.
let's just do this step by step. So you agree with me so far that we commonly do that, and we're not like disputing the nature of that. Like we do that, and both of us can say more or less, like, without filling in the details at the moment, that
But a
when we're
person
doing that,
says
we're saying,
that,
listen, let me finish the sentence, right? We can both agree, can we, that when we talk like that, we're saying things, broadly speaking, that at least can be true. Sometimes they are true. Like sometimes I'll say, you shouldn't have done that. And it's not just random words. It actually is true, what I'm saying. Right? Do you agree with that much?
not
So far?
simplicity, no. Because
Okay.
it depends on what standard we're talking about.
So I just tried to get agreement from you, and I'm not sure whether you did agree with me or not by what you said.
I did not.
You don't agree. So,
Because
sorry,
when we said we say to somebody, you ought not have punched him, and what did I
yeah.
say? I didn't agree to that. I said it depends on what standard you're talking about. Is it a standard where he's acting in self-defense? And then it's not the case that the person says, you ought not have done that. He ought to have protected himself. You see?
Okay, maybe
So
my
what
question
standard
wasn't
are we
clear.
talking about?
What I was trying to say was just simply, sometimes when people say things like this is wrong, sometimes stuff like that is true. That's all I'm saying. And if you're objecting to that, then what that means is that you're saying, no, at no time is it true when anyone says any value ascription. Right? Is that
Furthermore,
what you mean?
yeah, but
I'm sorry,
furthermore,
are we on the same page? Is that what you're
I
saying?
understand what you're trying to say, sir. Right? But furthermore, right, God's justice, right? His actions, his good actions, are not dependent upon our moral intuitions. Therefore, to say that, therefore, because we have certain intuitions, that these intuitions would apply to God, is not analogous.
So you're saying there's no point reasoning about what simple what
Our
a
feelings do
value
not determine what
description
is
might be
good.
like in
In
the
other words,
okay, but if I can't finish a sentence, you won't know what I'm saying. So the conversation's not going to work. So I think we're not on the same page. I just think you're saying stuff that's not related to what I'm saying.
I
So
understand what
I
you're
think
saying. I do.
I think we need to do
I
a bit of
question whether
meta
you're
in order to
understanding
make
what
sure
I'm
that
saying. I don't even know if you have I'm giving an opportunity to tell you what I'm saying.
I think we need to do a bit of meta on the conversation to make sure that we are talking about the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's just talking at each other isn't really working.
Well, I
So,
don't think we are talking about the same thing. That's what I'm telling
yeah,
you, sir. I'm
exactly.
trying to show
So
you
I'm
the
saying,
distinctions and the
let's
differences.
try and fix that, right? So the way that we would do that is let's make sure that the argument I was going to give it. So if you give me 2 minutes to explain the argument, that can be the topic of the conversation,
Okay.
right? But if you interrupt me before I finish speaking it, then we won't really have a subject. It won't work.
Okay.
Okay. So the way this argument works is that we've got this sort of normal everyday notion of ascribing values to things. Like sometimes I might say it's wrong to do whatever, and at least some of the time that type of stuff is true or false, right? It's the sort of thing that can be true or false, and sometimes is true at minimum. And then the thought was just that like sometimes a sort of good thing can happen to a person or a bad thing can happen to a person. And they don't deserve that to be the case, right? So, for instance, if you are an otherwise good person, let's say, and then somebody steals your handbag as you're walking down the street, and simple kind of moral calculus is going to be like this person's sort of neutral, morally neutral. The person's kind of like a good person; they're not doing anything this way or the other, and them just losing their handbag for no reason is bad. Right, so the overall kind of context that we're looking at is bad, and it's just a simple, straightforward, like somebody, a good person, just having their handbag stolen. That's bad. Obviously, there's the other complicating, like what if she was a secret agent? It doesn't matter about that. We're just saying a simple case. We can just look at it, cateris paribus, that's bad. And then it invites the idea that the way to restore the balance back would be to sort of add some good into the picture that like makes it neutral again. So like the woman gets her handbag back, and that's good. Not only is it good, the restoration of the overall net value back to where it was from the bad, taking it down a bit, we add some good and it brings it back up again, like a dial or something. That's justice. That's what it means. It's supposed to be like restoring and undoing cases where somebody gets something that they didn't deserve or loses something that they did deserve, and it rebalances that by resetting things as much as possible. So that's the notion of justice and moral worth and moral blameworthy and deservedness that's involved in the argument.
I would reject that. And I'll tell you why, sir. If I'm allowed to speak without being interrupted, right? In the Bible, the notion of good is not established by our little feelies. Okay, it's not established by man. It's established by the actions of God and His nature. And therefore, the Bible in Proverbs 14:12 says, "There's a way that seems right to a man, such as punching them," right? But in the end is the way of death, meaning that what we think and what it seems right to us, what seems good to us, is not indeed good. And it's in fact sinful and leads to death. This is what the Bible tells us. What the Bible tells us is that God and God alone is the standard of that which is good. Therefore, when we say something like, well, that was good, that's just our feeling, our opinion. Objectively speaking, with God as the arbiter, that does not necessarily represent goodness or badness. Furthermore, God is the arbiter of that which is good and evil, not us, right? So it is not the case that we determine something to be good, therefore it is good. It is the case that what God says is good is good. And the only way that we know what God says is good is in His Word, is the revelation, so forth and so on. And so you're working with the premise of some sort of a humanism to where we, the creatures, are determining what is good. No, our opinions are worthless in the eyes of God.
Okay, so it seemed like you're saying that the value theory bit that I was just laying out, that moral deservedness account of justice that I just laid out then, is secular because it doesn't mention God. But unfortunately, for that point, I mean, what you're bringing up is a question of meta ethics. But this value theory doesn't care about that. As long as you think some statements can be true, then you can get going with this, right? So it's not an objection to say, and if you remember, at no point anywhere in what I just sketched out did I say that the values themselves are fixed by some like subjective account, like my opinions or like whatever, my desires, anything like that. I didn't say anything like that. So it seems to me it's compatible with just a simple modal realism where those things are just true or false independently of anything, or they're compatible with at least some types of divine command theory where the reason the ultimate meta ethic for them is like it boils down to God's divine commands. Still, you're going to have this same calculus, right? Even on your theory, well, the sort of thing that goes on in a court of law doesn't have to be, you don't have to consult the Bible to know how to prosecute somebody when there's evidence that they've committed a crime, right? It's and the sort of the whole point of what's going on in that type of us giving a punishment to somebody for doing a crime, we think that it's like appropriate because it's doing something like what I described before, like they've done something wrong, and this like addresses that, like by restricting their freedoms or something. And I'm not saying I agree with this justice, the actual practice of justice as it's displayed anywhere in particular in the world, of course, right? But commonly, we think locking people up is a way of restoring the balance that I was talking about before. But whatever, that's a question of practical ethics. All I'm saying is that there's this calculus, and surely what justice means is some notion of restoration of the balance, right? Where some wrong has happened and a good needs to happen that like restores it back to neutral again. Now, that's independent of the meta ethics of whether it's God or not. It just seems to me that don't you think that that's right? I mean, or do you think that you disagree with even that simple kind of calculus?
Because what you're saying is you're talking about our court systems, our legal systems, what we have here on earth in a mundane sense, right? All of these, as I said, what we think, what we feel, right, is worthless to God, who is the arbiter and the very nature of that which is
but
good.
you're just talking about the meta ethic again. Let's just agree
hang on,
divine command theory is the meta ethic.
So the example that you gave, when you punch someone, a person says you ought not have done that. It was not good that you did that. And so could they be wrong? What establishes that to be a true statement? Someone's feelings? What if someone else has a different feeling?
Again, I don't understand why you're bringing the meta ethics up. What's that got to do with it?
I mean, why is it not relevant?
Because the calculus works. The calculus works. I already explained this.
Not dependent on our feelings. Why are we talking about feelings?
I'm not talking about feelings. I mean, I even said already, I didn't mention that. You've brought it up. So let's just say that the meta ethics is divine command. That makes you feel better.
When a person says you ought not have done that, based upon what, if not feelings, are they saying this?
I mean, there's loads of different theories about. You're familiar with
all those reasons are invalid in the eyes of a Christian model. So why should I, as a Christian, accept that?
There are Christians who are moral realists, and there are Christians who are divine command theorists, and there are Christians who are error theorists, right? So being a Christian doesn't entail any particular meta ethic, right? So you can pick and choose just as freely as I can on those if you want to.
I don't agree with that.
I'm not interested in
we
that.
We can freely choose, right? It is the case that people have different views, like you said, error theorists, right? Moral realists, moral anti-realists, right? These exist, right?
Yeah,
who's to say that any of them are true? It's just because there are these things doesn't mean that we can legitimately choose these things. I reject that.
Okay, but that's just the philosophy. That's just, you don't like meta ethics. Okay, I mean, people discuss that. Philosophers do. Christians take both sides of those arguments. It's got nothing to do with what I was talking about. I mean, what I was saying was there's this basic calculus kind of idea of how values work, and within that you can construct a notion of justice.
That I reject. Now what?
Well, I don't know if you do though, because
I
like
do.
your objections were based on metaethics, and I just told you that the metaethical question is orthogonal to this, so it doesn't make any difference what metaethical theory we pick.
Why don't we give? Why don't we? I don't know about if I'm okay. If it's the case that what is good is based upon God, and God says this is good, and we think, and I just gave a verse, what seems right to us in the end leads to death. This is what the Bible's
Okay,
telling us as true, and I accept it to be true. And atheists obviously will not accept that as true, right? So right there already, we're not in agreement on what establishes what is true.
okay. So when in a
You
practical
can't do that. You
question of
can't
like
do an internal critique
lawmaking,
or an external critique.
all right, do you let me know when you've said enough? Because I started to speak then, and you interrupted me, so you obviously weren't
I
quite
wasn't
finished.
done.
Okay,
Yes,
so let me know when you're done.
but I'm done now. I don't
All
even
right,
know if you heard what I said, but
I
it's
didn't hear
okay.
the last thing you said, no,
I'm
because
just
I was
saying that.
talking at the same time.
Yeah. Um.
Take
Okay.
another stab at it. Why don't you try again?
I'm just saying that you know. If you have a different model of understanding, you're appealing to all sorts of things, our notions of something, our
Uh-huh.
legal system, all of
Yeah.
these things, as if they're legitimate to me. Within the domain that I work with, they are illegitimate, sir.
Okay, I see. Well, I think I see what you mean, because on the one hand, you're saying the relevant notion of, say, moral values or whatever, that's at play with this theodicy, or this, it's not a theodicy, sorry, this argument, supposedly an argument against God, that, right, the argument from grace, or the argument from mercy, whatever. Um, for that to work, we need to be thinking about the relevant notion of moral values, and that's got to be a theological one, right? Because you're a Christian, you want to make sure that we're using the relevant concepts and not using some
Correct.
like earthly, corrupt, sort of manly kind of humanistic version of those concepts. Okay, have I understood the idea?
And then all I'm saying is, if one is to claim a contradiction, right? What I've been hearing is people are trying to equivocate on the word deserve for one, trying to make these definitions, construct a straw man, tear it down, and serve up a P and not P, right? These are not terms that I agree with. They're not getting my agreement. So they're attempting not even to do an external or an internal critique, but rather straw man a position and fabricate a contradiction. If anyone out there wants to internally critique my view and demonstrate that there's a contradiction there in my personal view, I'm open to that. Is that what we're doing? I just don't think so.
No, it's not what I'm trying to do.
I
So what where we got to was, I was saying that there's this value calculus where you can come up with an account of justice, and you started off objecting along meta-ethical grounds, but I think you've dropped that, and now the argument was, well, you shouldn't be using some earthly account of morality. You should be using the relevant theological notion of morality instead, right? And I think we've had a point
Okay.
of agreement there, right?
The,
And
the,
but
sta-
my
the argument is title is the logical
yeah,
problem of grace, I believe, or something like that.
yeah, we'll
So
get to
the,
that.
the so yeah, so what I'm understanding is you yourself said it's not an internal critique. From my understanding, like the logical problem of evil would be an internal critique. So why is
Um,
one an internal critique and then one not? And in
I don't know.
virtue of
Hold on,
what is
sorry.
there a problem?
Well, I haven't actually said, we haven't got to the argument yet. So let's worry about whether it's an internal critique or an external critique afterwards, because then it'll be easier to answer that question because you'll have heard the argument, right? It feels like putting the cart before the horse otherwise.
Well, I
Right?
have heard the argument. Are you presenting a
Well,
different argument?
I've never heard anyone else. We just had a little conversation before, but I'm giving you how I see it. So it
I
might be
don't share
different to
that
what the
view.
last time.
So where do we go from there?
So I'm trying to get to it. So I was, like I said, for the argument that I'm making to make sense at all, you have to basically buy that there's this relevant notion of justice, right? And you were kicking up already at that point. So that's why we haven't got to
I'm
it yet,
already in
because I haven't.
rejection of it. So how do we move further?
Well, the way we move through it is that I look at your reasons for rejecting it. And so far we had the meta-ethical question. I think we were able to dissolve that one. So now next I'm looking at the fact that you said...
So if it's a meta-ethical question, right?
Yeah, but it's not a
student,
meta-ethical thing. All I was saying so far was that there's this moral
so I'm not
calculus where you can
allowed to
express a
object
notion of
based
justice.
upon meta-ethic? Is it
But
the case that
it's
I'm
not a
allowed to?
meta-ethical. It doesn't matter, because I said that the same calculation would be made even if you adopt a divine command theory. So what difference does it make which meta-ethical? That's why that question is not relevant.
I'm not divine. I don't subscribe to DCT, by the way, but why don't you work with that model then and try it?
I offered that a moment ago. Yeah,
Because
like
so
let's
far
work with that
you've
then.
excluded
Fine.
God in your
So,
consideration when He's the
because I'm
basis
being
of that.
neutral. Yeah. Okay. So let's describe it in terms of well,
how
if
are
it's
you
not
being
divine
neutral,
command
sir,
theory,
when you're saying that we think of it this way? That's not neutral. I don't think of it that way.
I'm being neutral
When you
about the
say
meta.
we atheists
because
think of it this way, we secular humanists think of it this way.
Listen, look. It's like I'm telling you a story about some characters that are set in France, right? And you're saying, well, yeah, but you're like telling me that there's nobody in Germany then because it's just a story set in France. And I go, no, okay, well, let's just specify that there are people in Germany just to make you feel better. But still, let's get back to the story that's happening in France. Like, it's just pointless. It's just a waste of time. Like, who cares about the
So you're going to tell me a story about how people in France or Germany think this way about what ought to be done. This is the story you're going to give me, and then what? The story is what? True? Relevant?
What I'm
Certainly
saying
not
is the
acceptable to me.
ethical question doesn't make any difference.
Objective reality. Well, you
Okay.
keep saying that. I'm not convinced of that. Maybe.
Well, let me convince you about it, right? Let's go down that pathway, right? So what I'm saying, let's think about it like this. Just let me say this before you come out with the objection I think you're going to come out with if you don't let me get to the end of it, right? So we're in a normal practical setting in a court when somebody is sentenced for a crime, right? Sometimes that process, sometimes it's corrupt or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes I think it's basically just. It's just an example of justice, right? Sometimes that does happen, I think. And what I mean by that is there's, the notion that's going on there is the best way I can explain what's happening is what I was talking about before. Now, it seems to me it's related to the process of what's going on. It seems to me that, like, if a teacher, punishes a student for doing well on a test, that's the same notion of justice that's going on. It's just basically an imbalance. Like, they did well on the test, that's good, but the punishment that they're getting for it is bad, and that's like an undeserved, right? You can see that the same calculus is used to determine whether an action is deserved or unjust or whatever. Like, it's a simple sort of value calculus. And if you want to say that the values are ultimately picked by God, that's up to you. But like, if you think that calculus is like, are you saying when I give you a normal example of like when, say, a teacher punishes a pupil for doing well in a test, like, I think what goes on in your head is roughly the same sort of thing that I just described then. I don't think that you're like, I have no idea how to evaluate this. I better look in the Bible and see if it tells me how to evaluate it. I don't think you're like that. I think maybe the Bible sets out the same principle. Let me just one or two sentences and then I'll be quiet, right? I think maybe you're getting the sense of morality that you have from your religion and from what God says and stuff, but he's not prescribing specific rules for individual cases. He hasn't given you an infinite list of every possible context and what's good and what's bad and what's just and unjust in all of those cases. You determine it on the basis of a simple calculation. And it's the same one that I'm doing. Right, God
I don't determine it.
And your model,
So, okay, so if I may respond to what you said,
Mm.
and you're giving me a sort of a scenario, which I can surely acquiesce that within that domain, I'm agreeable to what you're saying. The issue is this: does that correspond to reality? Is it analogous to the model of God as the arbiter, not us? No, it's not. It's disanalogous. Therefore, if we're talking about reality, right? Your model within that narrative that you have, right? That sort of model that you have, whether fictitious or whether in this actual world that we live in, still is disanalogous to the ultimate justice of God, because our feelings are relevant to that which is good and evil. That's the fundamental premise that I work with. You don't share that premise. Your premise is necessarily inclusive of what we have arbitrated. That's the fundamental. Therefore, it's disanalogous.
Sorry, you're saying that whose feelings are relevant to morality?
Our feelings are not relevant to morality.
Are not relevant to morality. Yeah, I think our feelings are not
Sure.
relevant to morality too. So we agree
Okay.
about that, it seems.
Okay. Well, in your model, to me, I'm thinking that when somebody sees something, in virtue of what, is it the case that there's some normative notion of what they ought not do, if not their
Well,
feelings?
but now this, okay, so among the
Is it not
options,
intuition?
metaethical options, among the metaethical options is moral realism, right? Which is just the view which says that there are stance-independent moral truths, right? And so when your
Okay.
belief is that X is bad, if X actually is bad, then your belief is true, right? So that's how
Mm.
you come to believe a true fact about morality. So there's a simple metaethical sketch there, but it doesn't matter because the calculation that I
Well,
was talking about before can take place even if you fill in the blanks about like if it's uh, moral naturalism or moral non-naturalism or divine command theory or whatever. You
agree.
fill in the blanks however you like. But my point is that you're going to broadly um, draw the same. You're going to broadly use the same calculus, nonetheless,
I don't
right? You're
agree
still going to. Well,
because within your model, if you're going to speak in terms of a model that includes moral anti-realism, right, within what you're saying, right, the basis, right, of good and evil is not the same. And if you're going to be an error theorist, it is neither the case that it's good or evil.
yeah, the error theorist is like a special case because he's just going to say every moral proposition is false. And then the calculus just becomes really boring. There's nothing
Exactly.
interesting about it. But
So your
that's not.
model
But he is still
excludes
using the same
that.
calculus. No, he is still using the same calculus. It's just he can't derive anything interesting from it. But everybody else, like all you need is, and the only reason he gets that result is because he just says there are no truths at all. But everybody else thinks that at least all of these other types of realists, they all think that there are truths. So as long as you've got some truths on the
What
table,
about the
it's just a
anti-realist?
calculus that manipulates them.
Well,
What?
what is the anti-realist going to say with your little story,
Well,
your
I mean,
narrative about the
a moral
laws that we have,
anti-realist, like,
our feelings
sure,
about what we ought to do and we ought not to do,
but moral
and the court
anti-realist,
systems that we have on juries that are sometimes hung and not
yeah,
unanimous and all those
right. What
things.
do you think moral anti-realists do when they get asked to sit on juries? Do you think they write back and say, well, "I'm a moral anti-realist, so I can't come and sit on this jury"? Do you think that's how it works?
No, I think that
Right.
there's a sort of a
But what do
standard
they
that's
do then?
prescribed by
Right.
the there's a standard dependent upon, at least the United States, it's but based upon a jury of our peers, which is different than Iran, which is based upon maybe the mullahs or something, right?
But what do you think? So if imagine that
Different
you were a
model.
moral anti-realist, right? So that you
Because
think,
I thought we're
say,
talking about the American model. I mean, I know you live in
listen,
the UK, but
let me ask you a question, right? Imagine you're a moral anti-realist, right? And you believe
okay,
what's good is what makes you feel good in particular, right?
okay.
Right.
Hmm.
And then you receive a letter in the mail and it says you need to appear as a juror on a trial, right? And then you try and object and they say, nope, that doesn't count. You have to, right? Now, what are you going to do when you sit there? Do you think that that person
I don't
would be able to
I don't
evaluate
think
the justice
I
question that's
don't
being put in front of them?
I don't think I don't think a person even has to determine or decide what is good or what is evil, to be able to say that based upon the preponderance of the evidence, that they are guilty of what they are charged. I don't think you need to be moral or immoral or
Okay,
believe. I
that's
don't
fair
think you
enough,
have to
right?
be a
I
moral
suppose the
realist.
question of the factual question of whether the person is guilty is not a moral question. But let's
That's
say that
right.
you're on the sentencing committee, and it's up to you to decide how much punishment they should get. At
Mhm.
that point, it is a question of justice. And then, what does a moral anti-realist do? Do you think in that setting, or do they have to
At
say,
that
"I
point,
can't do this"?
at that point, he's out of it. His opinion doesn't matter in a sense that the judge, right, sentences. So the moral anti-realist, whether he thinks that the judge's sentence of 2 months or 2 years or 20 years is irrelevant on what he feels like, because whatever the judge has determined, the sentencing that's appropriate based upon what he's heard, that's
Right. You see,
easily going to be the situation.
right. So I think that I don't think that's right, because I just think what happens is that the moral anti-realist, right, is they set their values that they think are there based on their preferences. But then when it comes to working out what's just and unjust, what they have to do is apply the type of calculus I was talking about before,
They don't have to
because they're
do
going to have
anything.
to
They're not
say,
involved in the process. Their job is
all
done.
right, but you're just
They either
interrupting
vote
me halfway
guilty,
through.
not
So just let me
guilty.
finish what I'm saying. You just
Mhm.
interrupted me halfway through, right? So what I'm saying is that the moral anti-realist who thinks that moral values are based on their preferences, right? What they do is they decide what's good and what's bad based on whether they like that or whether they don't like that, right? But once
Yeah.
that task is done, they then decide which things are just and unjust based on whether it's distributing back in to something that was good, something that was bad. So if they look at, say, somebody having their purse stolen, and they happen to think that that's bad because they don't like it, because of their own subjective opinion, right? And then it just happens that they see somebody giving her purse back, and they just happen to like that because that's their personal opinion too, right? They would conclude, completely independently of the meta-ethical question, just simply that a bad thing happened, and then a good thing kind of made up for that, and that would be a case of justice. Right? So
Yeah.
independent. So I just explained to you then that even a moral anti-realist, right, when it comes to this question of justice, is going to do the same thing, right? That's what
Yeah.
justice is. So,
Irrespective of what this moral anti-realist juror feels, right? The judge is going to simply admonish them to get your feelings out of it. He's going to ask them to consider the evidence, not your feelings and
all
your
right, but
and what you
can you?
think about is right or wrong. The judge is
Okay,
asking you to discourage him from doing that.
I grant you that. Let's just say I completely grant you that. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, that the person, the anti-moral realist, is going to make these determinations, is what you said.
So that they ascribe values subjectively, but the question of justice still has to be a calculation, right? That's what I'm saying. So it's just
Not
that
by the moral
this calculus
anti-realist.
is independent of, yes, but the moral anti-realist. I just painted the picture precisely for you of how they do it. Gave you an example of them doing it
Now,
and
okay,
how they
let's say they've done that. Of what value is there other than their little feelies? Is it going to
not about
increase their
feelings.
sentence? Is it is it going to let them off? Like, well, what? Nothing.
No, it doesn't matter about that. The point is that the moral
I'm fine.
anti-realist,
It doesn't
even the
matter.
moral anti-realist, still avails himself of this calculus theory when they're working out questions of justice. Everybody does it, apart from the
And
error theorists.
well, and let's say he does that, and so
Everything.
does the air theorist, and so does the
And so
moral
does the
realist,
Christian
and God
theist, and
finds
so
none
does
of that
the
is wrong.
Hindu. Everybody does, right?
Yeah. And then you work
That's
under the
what justice
domain
is.
of God, right? As no, that's not what justice is, sir. Right? That's your notion of justice without God, right? These
Well,
individuals all have differing opinions, let's say, right? And under the domain where God is the sole arbiter, their opinions are worthless. This is what I've said numerous times. And therefore, even if they come to the conclusion they're illegitimate within the domain that I'm working with, right? And so in other words, their opinions, their feelings, their thoughts are worthless
yeah,
in the eyes
okay.
of God.
let's say that there's another notion of justice, right, which is God justice or something, right? And that works just like you said then. It's basically just, it's God decides what's just and what's not, right? So it's not up to us. We can't tell him.
Well, he's the
No way to
arbiter.
calculate or show. Yeah, it's up to him. Completely his,
And
his
then God
whim.
and God alone in James 4:12.
Okay, but even so, right, that's not the same notion as what I was talking about. So then the question is just,
Not the same
is
notion.
it's not the same notion as what I was talking about, no, because it doesn't
I
ensure
reject
that
your
there's a
notion
restoration.
of
Sorry?
how things are. I reject your notion of how things are. Now, within your domain, I can certainly agree that within that model, right? Yeah, you know, uh,
Well, go on.
it's legitimate within that model. But then what I'm saying is that does it correspond to the reality that I believe to be the case? And that would be absolutely not. Within that little
Okay.
airy fairy fantasy land story and model, yeah, I'll agree
Yeah,
with
right.
you.
But look, I don't know what the airy fairy story is supposed to be, but look, if we take a practical
Something that does
example
not
again,
correspond with reality.
I don't know why you have to interrupt me every time I get
Yeah, it's a
say
question.
anything.
I just answered it, I guess. Maybe it was a rhetorical
I
question.
mean, it was a rhetorical question, yeah. Maybe I won't do that if it's confusing. But look, let's say there's two notions of justice, right? The one I described and the one that you described. And that certainly they both exist. They're both like things we can describe, at least theoretically, there's two notions, possible notions of justice on the table, right? One is like whatever God says is just is just. The other one is this kind of restoration balance theory that I've been describing. Now, when I reckon when you come to a situation, a humdrum situation like a teacher punishing a pupil for doing good on a test, you don't need to wonder what God thinks about that because
Says
it's
you.
completely independent. Well, I
Says
just think that's
you.
what you do. Well, fine. Let me finish what I'm saying then. I just think that even if the notion is in some sense grounded in God, the practical everyday circumstances, the moral like comings and goings of our lives don't constantly involve wondering what God would say about that. We know how to like justice is not just like particular. It's not just every individual case of justice is different. There's lines that we can draw between them, similarities. They embody the same notion, and that notion is what I was saying earlier. That's certainly what's going on in court cases. It's a simple notion of whatever. Now, the theological notion, it seems to me, doesn't have any applicability to anything apart from questions about what that directly involve God. So, like, it might be just or unjust for anyone at all apart from God, and they have to obey basically the idea of justice that I was talking about. But when it comes to God Himself, right, what's just and what's not just, different from that. It's like it's just up to Him, whatever's just and what's not. Now, the real problem with that sort of strategy, it seems to me anyway, is that whenever we say that God is perfect, like perfection typically means that it's perfectly just.
Typically mean.
But if all you mean by that is that God is just has his own notion of justice, which sits above and beyond the normal everyday notion, then we just mean he isn't perfectly just in the everyday notion, right? So that we shouldn't generate any expectations of what the everyday notion of justice
Just you
say,
define
right? Which is
purpose for
giving
me, sir.
people what they're owed. Let me finish, right? The everyday notion of justice gives you an expectation that you'll probably get what's deserved to you because like that's what justice is, right? If God was perfectly embodying that, nobody would ever be like ultimately wronged. But if it's just up to His will, you can't have that expectation at all because His will could be anything. So like, you
You
know,
know,
if you want to say
sir,
perfectly
if I may
good,
say,
and that's what
you're making a lot of
then,
statements. If I may
yeah,
say, you're making a lot of statements, and you just assume these things to be true. You don't get the agree. You're not getting the agreement of your interlocutor. When we do that,
I know.
you're making it. You're orating a lot of things with a lot of assumptions, right? That you simply within your rhetoric assume is true. You don't get my agreement, nor do you even ask. You just assume it to be the case, and I'm in rejection of almost every assumption that you've said. When it comes to the teacher, you assume that they're just making this arbitrary decision. How do you know that they are not number one, praying to God for truth and what is right, And how do you know they're not drawing from personal
John, it was a
experiences
thought
in the past
experiment.
where they've
There's
been
no danger
revealed
that
that which is
maybe it was
true?
different. John, it was a thought experiment, right? There's no danger that the fictional teacher that I imagined was secretly doing something else. She's a fictional character.
Okay.
It was a thought
So,
experiment. So there's no epistemological worry
okay.
there. That's ridiculous.
Once again, in your model, this is what this teacher's doing. She's not referring to God. She's just making her own decisions based upon whatever you want to say, moral realism, moral anti-realism, whatever, right? And then you say, this is what this is, right? Good. Within there, I might even agree. The question is, does this correspond to the reality of what is and is not justice? And I would say no.
So it's not a case of, well, hold on. No, you said that within its own scope or something, you might agree. What that
Yes.
means is that it is a case of justice on the theory that I'm advocating, right? That's what you mean by that. So it is a case of
You're
injustice.
proposing a model that is perhaps
Yeah.
coherent within your model. Okay.
But that case
But
where
you're
the
talking to
teacher
someone who
slaps the
rejects your
pupil.
model
Sorry, John, just to be,
and
I
the
don't know what.
presuppositions behind it.
This is tough. Look, in the case where I gave you, right, where the teacher slaps the kid for no reason, right, or despite them doing well on the test, right? On my theory, easy, it's a case of injustice, right? Do you think there's something?
I'll put it this way.
You're saying that
I'll give it this way. Given the presupposition that the teacher is the arbiter and the sole arbiter of that situation, yes, it is unjust. I could even say it's unjust, given that presupposition to be true as a starting point, that what they have determined is unjust in your story. Of course, I could say that.
okay, I don't know what it's got nothing to do with who the arbiter is, right? It's just that the pupil did well and they get punished. I mean, it's just a good thing and a bad thing. It doesn't matter about the arbiter. I don't know where that comes from.
But I will say one thing further. If you're looking at God, first and foremost, if you're trying to determine if God is acting justly or not, you're in sin. Number one, we
I'm
we
probably
already
in sin. Let's just
we
start that.
begin with the presupposition that God is just. That is the starting point. It's not a conclusion.
It's your starting point.
Okay.
Fine, John. You're just preaching now. This sounds a bit weird. There's no point telling me I
I'm
might
not
be
trying
in
to
sin.
preach, sir. I'm not trying to preach. I'm trying to
Don't tell
explain
me
to
that I
you.
might be in sin. That's really just patronizing, isn't it?
No.
It is.
I'm not saying you're. I never said you're in sin, sir. Right?
You just
I'm
said
saying
I might be in.
within my model, when a person judges God, they are in sin. So I'm not saying you
Obviously, I
need to
was
be in
doing
my
that earlier.
model. I'm not saying
Obviously,
that.
I was doing that earlier because I was saying that the notion of justice, right, is that we should use that to.
Okay, but you're not working within my model. So because you're not working within my model, you're not in sin. Sin probably doesn't even exist in your model.
Exactly. Yeah. It does. I don't care about that notion.
Exactly. And I don't care about
what you think about me in any way.
stories.
Listen, John, I don't know you. It doesn't matter what your opinion is with me, however you say it. Right? You could hate me or love me. I don't care. You could call it sin if you want to. That's what I'm objecting to. I just don't care about it. So let's just leave that for another day.
You don't care about sin, and I don't care about your little examples. So now what? Where we go from here?
All right. Well, look, if you want to talk to people about philosophical arguments, then you need to allow them to bring up an example. And if you're just going to say, I don't care about it, then that just means you don't want to have this conversation.
No.
Right?
Well, first and foremost, sir, there's a context of I don't care, by the way.
Okay.
Right. That's taken out of context. The phrase I don't care. It can be understood more than one way, correct?
Yeah, this feels very tangential, but I mean,
perhaps you didn't understand the nature of what I said with that phrase. Just maybe.
Okay. I'd rather talk about the original thing we were supposed to talk about, though. Is that all right?
Yes, but what I'm trying to tell you, sir, is you're given a scenario, you're dictating the conversation, we're focusing on the model that you're proposing, right? Your theoretical model, right? And you want me to fix it, and I could just affirm it all the way down. But the question is this: within that model, God is evil. How about that one?
Yeah. Okay. Look, I haven't even stated the argument yet because all I've done is said what the the preamble at the beginning, just to set things up.
Okay.
This is the language that the argument uses. That's
Preamble
all I was
then.
saying. Well, so I was trying to just start off by saying this is the notion of justice that's going on. It's a moral notion of justice.
One notion that I don't agree with. Okay, let's go.
Well, maybe the argument's not for you then. I mean, like, I don't know. If you can you just list? Can you entertain the argument without
If it's the case
interrupting?
that you propose the notion of justice and I'm on board with that, I think we could proceed. But if I don't agree with the notion that you're proposing, where do we go from there, sir?
Do you know what might be more fun? Was like if you let me say the whole argument, and then at the end, because of the whole thing will have happened, you might know what the most relevant, the most interesting things
I have a fun argument to say too,
were.
but it might be
Okay.
preachy to you. It just may be preachy. Because I could go on
All
for
right.
half an hour too, sir, and try to beg for your attention. Maybe you won't
All
be
right. Do you
interested.
want to
Maybe
continue
you
talking?
don't care about sin.
John, honest question. Do you want to continue this conversation? Because I feel like you're not enjoying it.
Um,
We don't have
I will
to.
say this, sir. I will say this,
interesting.
sir. I could see that you're motivated to express your model, even knowing that I reject your model. You want me to
Mhm.
just listen and consider, and you want to orate, and you want to set the parameters of a model I don't even agree with. And I already told you that you can
Yeah.
go on and me agree that within that domain, I can certainly be agreeable. But once I agree, that doesn't mean I'm agreeing that it corresponds to reality.
Okay.
That's the fundamental issue, in my opinion. So you could go on and on and on, and getting my agreement solves nothing.
I just thought that, like, saying it, because there's two ways of looking at it, right? You could just say, we'll go through it one bit by bit. And if at any point you want to object, we stop and we go through all of the objections to that
I
bit
don't object
and
within that
only move
model.
on afterwards.
Setting it, but you're
Well,
setting it.
just a method. This is just
If you're going to ask
methodological.
me, do I think that corresponds with reality? Then I will object.
All
But
right. Listen,
it
I'm talking
seems as
about like
though you're
how,
making these assumptions that this is true, and I don't agree. If you're going to say, well, this is really just a thought experiment, and this is just, we're putting it there, forget whether it's true or not, just within this model. You give me a little story, I'm listening, I'm nodding my head, and all those conclusions that you come with, I can nod my head. That solves nothing.
okay.
So why even
So,
bother wasting your time, sir, if that's going to be the result?
what would you prefer? That I like
I would
make sure I
prefer
just
to
do everything
know.
the way you
I
want
would
it.
prefer to know because it's not my argument. It is an argument presented to me.
Well,
I would
I was
like to
going to make
know
the
what
argument.
is
It was
being
my
argued.
argument.
Is it an internal critique or not? We could begin there.
Well,
Am I
how about I
allowed to ask
say
a
the
few
argument,
questions?
John? If you want to talk about an argument and I'm going to make it, the first thing that should happen is that I make the argument. I haven't
You
actually
haven't
got there
made
yet.
an argument, have you?
Well, you haven't let me get there because you stopped me at like the preamble. I didn't even get as far as
Okay.
saying.
So is the preamble necessary to begin your argument?
It was
Or is
in
it just
order to
something you want
elucidate
to
the notion
do?
of justice that's involved. Yeah, that is required.
And so does the preamble have assumptions that are required to be agreed by me?
I mean, it's the language that sets it, that's the language of the argument. So it's the framework that the argument is stated in.
Yes. And so within the framework of the argument, in other words, I could certainly agree that the whole argument is valid based upon the assumptions
Hmm.
given here, right? You're not going to convince me that it's sound.
Yeah, and you know what? I have these same like feelings when I talk to Christians about some of their arguments as well. Like when we talk
Mhm.
about the cosmological argument, often I
But I'm
park
not trying to
lots of
convince you,
problems that
sir.
I have. Listen, I
I'm,
often park lots of the things that in my worldview tell me that we couldn't even get this far down the line, that I should have started interrupting a lot earlier. But I put all of that to one side in order to entertain this argument. And what I'm doing there is I'm giving the theist a load of stuff for free in order to start playing the game here, this point in the dialectic. sometimes
not
just
interested in
fun,
playing
just to see what's
games.
happening.
I've heard that.
Well,
I've heard that word come out of your mouth, sir, a few times, even with my
yeah,
friend, the Muslim metaphysician, and he
that's
made a
right.
video on that in terms of the term game that you're playing. Right now, sir, you might be playing a
Oh,
game and you might be creating these scenarios, which I may consider fantasy or not corresponding to reality. But I want to talk about what I believe to be real. And I'm hoping that you, sir, express something that you believe to be real. If that is moral anti-realism or atheism is true or something like that, or the notion of good as presented from an anti-realist perspective is true, right? That would be one thing. But then when you start talking about my Bible, my God, my words in the Bible related to deserved and mercy and grace and justice and judgment and sin and all these things, you've now entered my domain, sir, in a sense of the
well,
Bible.
look, if it's, I don't know whether this is a better way for you to think about it. Then pretend that it's got nothing to do with your religion whatsoever, right? Maybe it
I'm
hasn't.
doing that. And
Maybe
I
your
told you
notion of,
I would be getting agreement in a sense that, okay. And so it's
right.
just an
So,
exercise in futility is what I'm trying to tell you.
but that's, look, philosophy is often like that. You don't often get to only entertain arguments
So
where
after
absolutely
all of
everything is
that, I'd
part of your
say,
worldview.
okay, Dr. Malpass, your argument is valid.
You don't
Whoop,
listen.
freaking do.
All right, I'm getting bored of this. John, I don't think you want to hear the argument. I felt like I've battled you for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes to try and even say it. I haven't got there because you don't want to hear it. So I
If
think I'm
that's
getting
what you feel,
bored
sir,
of
I'm
this.
not going to force you to give an
Yeah.
argument.
You've done a pretty good job. So maybe we'll talk about it again another day, but I think I'm
Sure.
hitting my limit. So I'm going to call it a night.
I appreciate your time.
Okay, no problem. Nice to talk to you.
Sorry about that, Alex.
That was embarrassing, John.
That was just
You're embarrassing.
Yeah, you really are. Ugh. Completely dishonest.
Any other PhD philosophers you want to bring?
Oh, like you think you won that? Are you really proud of what you
Do you
did
want
there?
to be
Please don't
rude
put words
to
in my
them?
mouth. Please don't put words in my mouth, sir.
Wow,
That's not what I said.
what garbage. Unbelievable. Ugh. Garbo.
Did you in any way grow from that, John? Did that help you like expand your understanding of anything?
I understood where he was going, and I told him he didn't need to waste my time. Right? I literally understood what he was trying to do.
Sure you did. Sure you
What was he trying to do? What was he trying to do?
He was trying to work on the notion, right, a sort of mundane notion of justice and so forth, and he wanted to use that model of one which I reject, and
What model?
and to use it as a springboard for an argument. That's what he's trying to
What
do.
model? What are you talking about? What model?
You don't think he was
I
trying
already made my statement for it.
Yeah, but it didn't make any fucking sense because you're a fucking doofus. Do you care to try to communicate like a normal person?
So whether that statement is true or not may depend upon your fifis.
You're just worthless.
What'd you think of that, Jack?
Another value statement.
Pathetic.
That was hilarious. Just hilarious. Just on non-stop stonewalling.
Stonewalling, prevarication,
dive, duck,
interruptions,
and dive.
obstructionism, prevarication.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're not going to get me fawning over every word, that's for sure.
So disgusting.
Well, not going to get him fawning over a word. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, what's that even?
You're such a
what
dip.
the fuck does that even mean?
Now, you can open the Snibble Fest if you want. I'll just mute up.
One aspect of it that was very
You should
entertaining.
just mute up forever because you're worthless anymore. You have nothing left.
One aspect of it that was very entertaining was how irritated Alex was.
That's the only
was-
thing.
That was
that.
just
Come on,
that was
man.
just
Jeez.
great.
That was very funny.
Jeez. I don't know why that amuses
But
you.
then,
You're
you know,
really
I
annoying.
gotta hand it to you, Jack. I'm not a philosopher, as you know, and he's a professional philosopher,
Or a
right?
thinker, or
But
honest.
I think I would like to thank you, Jack, because I was able to implement words like domain and legitimacy. So I thank
Oh, yeah,
you
good
for
job.
that.
Wow.
You know,
yeah.
Alex slumming is one thing, but this is John Lee.
Yeah.
He's just a fucking moron, mush brain,
Ugh.
committed to trolling people. There are better targets out there. You must know this.
But that was great, right, Tom? I mean, that was just John Lee on display.
Oh yeah, he completely
it was-
exposed himself for like the dishonest shit interlocutor that he is.
Yeah, it was
Just like he did yesterday or earlier today or the day before or for the past week or whatever it's been. It's nothing new anymore.
Well, I'll
It
tell
was-
you what,
It's the
Tom.
same
I
old
mean,
fucking bullshit.
I'll tell you what.
If anybody's time
I'm
is
gonna-
wasted, it's anybody who's listened
Yeah.
to you make noises with your fucking face.
Sniveling, a lot of coke. But I do have to say this, Tom. If you ever had intend to like upload it, I would like to watch it. Just like when I watched the Pine Creek one, it was a little bit different perspective after having concluded it to watch it. I'm assuming you have intentions to upload it. I would love to watch it.
I'm with JJ on this one. Such garbage.
I don't think that's content.
I mean, one fighter came to the ring and the other like
Yeah.
dodged out of the arena and through stairs.
No, but that-
Seats.
but-
I mean,
that's all accurate, but it was great content. It was absolutely riveting.
I find it interesting. He never answered whether his argument, quote unquote, was internal or external. That's number one.
ugh.
Number two, I find it interesting. He said a lot of words, and it wasn't like I was trying to stop him from presenting his argument. He felt the need to do a preamble, a very lengthy
yeah, he wasn't trying to
preamble.
stop him from presenting.
It
his
was
argument.
trying to stop us.
That's hilarious.
Constantly interrupting.
Oh boy.
Constantly.
I literally asked him, is it necessary for you to begin with the preamble
Alex loses
rather than just go to the argument?
That's pretty rare. He's pretty charitable, but like that's
It was great. He was
yeah. Come on, jeez.
It was like
Really
it was like
annoying.
watching somebody volunteer to like fight in a boxing match, and then as soon as they get in the ring, they realize they're outmatched and they try to run the entire time. This is
Yeah,
exactly what it
yeah.
was like.
They tear off their gloves. They run around. They leap out of the ring.
Is it possible to get
Crying
Matt
in
Adams'
fear.
opinion if he was there?
They do. They just strip all their clothes off and then they say they won.
Is it
To make
possible
the-
to mute John right now and Matt Adams?
He
If
just wants
he's-
Matt.
if he's
just wants
critical,
Matt to
I
be
would
his
love to
hype
hear
man.
the
Yeah, he
criticism.
wants what is
He
that?
wants the
actual
hype.
He
criticism I
wants
may
Matt and
respect.
they can jerk each other off. Isn't that how
Yes,
he
they
phrases
want
it?
to. Yes, they want to stroke each other off. He wants Matt to be his hype man. Be like, you won that, John. That was so good.
Oh,
Whatever.
Alex finally left too.
You obviously won that exchange with Alex. He was running scared with his tail tucked.
Come on back anytime, Dr. Malpass.
Yeah, with your charity and your actual
Little
knowledge,
dash of that
an
Malpass.
idiot can be a jerk. Jeez.
Little dash of that pass, that Malpass.
I don't know why.
You know what's interesting is that I may be have far more experience, interacting on a one-on-one than he has, maybe.
Such
What?
garbage. That he even thinks to be proud of that.
No.
How?
No. John, you are a zero, so it can never be a one-on-one with you. You're a zero. Understand?
That was a burn. Damn, that was a burn.
The 1-0.
That was good, wasn't it?
That was
That was
good.
fucking sick.
That was
1v0
fire.
tonight. Tonight only, 1v0.
That was really good.
Wow.
I'll probably
Well,
go in the
John,
RV.
Sad.
Yeah, John Lee.
Yeah, nobody gives a
that
fucking
was
shit.
That was fucking embarrassing, bro.
I'm not embarrassed. I know that much.
You're
No,
dumber than you are.
okay.
Holy fuck,
That's
dude.
superpower.
Yeah, exactly.
You're free to be embarrassed for me.
That might be the dumbest thing you've ever said.
Too stupid to be
Is it
embarrassed.
embarrassing to
Pretty low
invite?
bar.
Is it embarrassing to invite a prestigious philosopher into this train wreck that you guys assume to be? Is it
I'm a little
embarrassing?
embarrassed. Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed. Yeah.
There you go, and I'm not. So there we go.
No,
That's
he
the
says
reality. You
no,
are
he says he
embarrassed
enjoys
for
it
yourself,
sometimes.
and I'm not.
Does lack of
That's the
feeling
reality.
embarrassed mean that you
That's
didn't
the
embarrass
reality.
yourself, John?
And then if you want to ask me again and again and again if I feel embarrassed, then that alone is not embarrassing to you.
John, does lacking the feeling of embarrassment mean that you didn't embarrass yourself?
Could be. Yeah.
Could it be that you just
Could
don't
be.
have any shame? Maybe.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Could be.
But it could
Not
also mean that you did
necessarily.
embarrass yourself. You're just, in denial.
In some
That's
sense.
certainly logically possible too. But what qualifies one as being embarrassed? Does one need to feel embarrassed to be embarrassed, or is it the opinion of someone else that the situation is
Oh,
embarrassing, and
here
therefore
come the
you,
deep
sir, are
philosophical
embarrassed
question.
Yeah.
The word
How does that
grift.
work?
Here it comes.
The real deep philosophical discussion starts now. Huh?
Was that the preamble? Do I have to listen to this?
I don't know
So
about this
stroke our
or that,
beer
but
while we contemplate this.
Jack, how do you think about the fact that Alex
feel
never even rendered the argument?
It was incredible.
I'm actually sad he left because I'd actually
It was a-
I would
it
have
was
liked to
a-
hear
he
it.
just wasted his time.
It was a masterpiece of stonewalling. It was.
You could have started off with the argument, and maybe that would have been. Maybe he'll learn next time.
It was worthy of Matt Bell. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
That
It was
you found
worthy of
Alex-
Garth Dawkins.
That you found Alex
Maybe-
was.
I actually tried to
hilarious.
say, okay, this is what's going on. Is it absolutely necessary for you to do this? It's going to be an exercise in futility, in my opinion, of course, right? And so it's like, why don't you just skip the preamble rather than spend close to an hour with it, and do the argument? It seemed like he was hell bent on putting forward his preamble. Well, that's what he got.
Do you think anyone else thinks that's a problem? You fucking clown.
He's just coping.
Yeah, in
What was-
other
what-
words, you
fucking
went,
pathetic, dude.
in other words, John, you went right to the meta, right?
Yeah, immediately.
John,
to
what do you
the
think? What do you think is the purpose of this so-called preamble?
You know what's actually interesting is that he thought
No.
I was going into the meta when I talked about sin and judging God, and by us judging God, it's a sin. He actually thought I was talking about meta. I was not. I was talking about the contrast between the different models.
The contrast.
And he took it kind of personally, and I go, whoa! I did not say you're in sin. Did you see how he took it? He took it
didn't take it
offensively.
personally. He didn't care anything about what you think.
I doubt that's true. You're just dumb.
But when you went
You know-
right to complaining about the preamble and posturing and all of that, that was you
You mean the
going to the meta,
preamble that
right,
I
John?
didn't care about, that I explicitly told him?
Alex
Well,
just
that
reminded.
doesn't have to do with the question I was asking. The question I was asking was you going to the meta, right, John?
Well, let's
Alex.
get this. I think it was reviewed. I don't care if you don't have a notion of sin. That's what he's expressing to me.
He's not
And I
answering the
don't
question because
care.
he knows the answer.
So you were trying to head off the argument by saying that questioning God is sinful, right? And so he was saying, I don't care. I'm going to run the argument. And
That's misrepresent. He misunderstood me, and you were misunderstanding me too. I said, sir, they're working with different models, and within your model, right, the arbiter is the people in question that you're giving examples for: the teacher, the juror, so forth, and so the moral anti-realist, the moral realist, so forth and so on. And I said that has certain assumptions within your model, right? In my model, right, a God and God alone is sole arbiter. I referenced James 4:12, right? And I said that when we,
not about
right,
you
not
as an
necessarily
ultimate
you,
or somehow
when
either,
we
right?
judge God, we are in sin, or you are in sin, or one is in sin, and he took it personally.
Because it sounded like you were trying to head off his argument by
It
questioning him
sounded like
whether it
that
was
to him
produced in.
too.
Is it yeah, because that's what you were doing. You were like, is it an internal critique or an external critique? Because internally, questioning God is a sin. Blah 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 blah. That's obviously what you were doing.
You know,
It
Alex
doesn't
reminded
even
me
matter.
of the most hilarious moment, which is when John said, "How do you know the teacher didn't have a reason to hit the student in your thought experiment?"
Yeah, then. I said, how do you know that the teacher, right, is praying to God? What I said was, I
Wow.
don't. How do you know that? How do you know that the teacher is not praying to God for guidance of what is true and what is right?
Because he invented
Or how do you know the teacher's not drawing
Hey
from
John,
past
John, he
experiences
invent.
of
Hey,
where they
hey
came to that
John, he
revelation
invented.
from
Hey
God? That was
John,
what I said.
John, he invented the
John,
teacher. That's all he
what
knows. You
difference?
stupid bitch.
John, what difference would it make?
Because what he's saying is that the teacher determined it,
There
right?
was another
Rather than
time.
God
Oh my God,
determined
this
it
guy's a
and
lunatic.
God revealed that to the teacher. There's a big paradigm
There's
shift
another
there.
time
Different.
where Alex Malpass asked him a question about, okay, like, do you think it's like right or like bad or whatever? I don't forget how to word it. For someone to like hit another person for no reason. And then John goes into like, well, like it could be the case that it was self-defense and like Alex literally said for no reason. So what John's saying there would just like be completely not engaging in anything that Alex said, right?
You know what I did find interesting was that he kind of expected to have a speech and everyone's just riveted to what he's saying. I could see
What? What
that.
are
Maybe
you
he's
talking
used to
about?
that. Maybe you don't know what I'm talking about. I know
I
what I'm
didn't
talking
notice that
about.
at all.
I've talked to a lot of
You don't
people,
know what
and
you're talking about.
certain people like expect their oration to garner the attention of
I didn't get
everybody.
that, and I didn't get that at all. And
I
I
did.
think that's
I did.
indicative of the fact that he was so
Because
tolerant of all your interruptions.
because that's
Because if
right.
that was
He's
the
the one
case, or
that
he
kept.
actually did
If you
have that
notice,
expectation, we would have
if
actually
you
seen it a lot
notice,
sooner.
if you play the tape, right? Is it the case that I interrupted? Absolutely. Is it the case that he interrupted? Yes. But if you notice, I didn't snivel about him interrupting me. I did preface it by saying, "If I can speak without being interrupted," was what I said, right? But if you notice, he was complaining the whole time. I find that interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, but
So
well, that
interesting.
was because you were, and he actually had an ambition to have a discussion.
I don't agree that he wanted an ambition. He wanted to run his thing, going, nodding my head, This is what he wanted.
No.
Active listening? Yeah, he might have wanted that.
Yeah, that's not a
You're
discussion.
dumb.
That's a lecture.
John, you should be
Sully,
banned.
can you believe this guy?
Yeah, John
No,
should be banned.
Yeah, he should be.
He's so
What are you
worthless.
What are you
I've
talking
been
about?
I've been to many classes in terms of the professor with 500 students and so forth. To me, he was on the podium giving a
And so
lecture.
on.
Many classes.
I don't get that impression at all.
I don't think you've been to any of those classes, but okay.
Well, I'm entitled to my opinion.
So what?
Okay.
So it means that I don't mind if you disagree. It's not the case that I have to have your agreement. I don't know about you guys. Maybe you guys need mine.
To me, this just sounds like you're tone policing and you're fucking coping and you're jealous. That's all it sounds like.
Cool story, bro.
Yeah.
She's a sister, not a bro.
I mean, but like John's garbage, though, right, Jack?
It's
You know
fake,
that,
bro.
right?
Yeah, but that's exactly what
He's
we
not-
wanted. We got exactly what we
Right,
wanted.
Jack. I mean, like, think about it. You get
Well,
what
I
you
wanted
want.
to
You're complaining about it.
I wanted
So in
wanted
other
John
words,
to actually
two
try
people
and engage
want
the
to
argument.
complain. Thank you, Jack. Is that a valid series of statements there?
I didn't want endless stonewalling. I wanted John to actually try and deal with the argument.
Yeah, I
But
never
he
even got to
can't.
hear the argument.
That's
Short
because
of
you're
him.
in atheist fantasy land.
But short of him dealing with the argument, we got the next best thing, right?
So I'll tell you what. Okay.
Oh no.
As
John can't
far as I'm
engage in
concerned,
shit.
as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing there that was not me. That's number one. You guys have known me for years, and so it should not be a surprise to you what you got. If you are surprised, you people are idiots.
Oh, so you're
And
saying
so
we
you
should
got
never
exactly
expect you to
you
engage in
got
an argument?
exactly what should have been expected, ought to have been expected, deserved to expect.
Why?
Actually, there was a time when you would engage because you thought you had something. You never did, but you thought you did. And I think now you know you have jack shit to engage with. So you resort to this bullshit. And it's really just pathetic.
I love these comments.
But I like it that he's like, you guys know I never engage, so why would you expect me to engage? That's literally what you just told.
Right? Why would
Yeah.
you invite a professional philosopher
Oh my
to
God.
engage with a person that never engages? It's either stupid, insane, which is it?
Him both.
Well, you engage until you.
Because I don't
feel
think
that-
you could make an argument that what you got from me right now with Alex Malpass was something different. I was not myself. This is something foreign, alien, strange. You can't make that argument.
Well, I mean, it is true that the last time you were talking to Alex, you were engaging with him, and also, in addition to that, once you
Well, the
found
last time
out,
he gave an argument, this time he did.
Well, you didn't let him. And in addition to that,
I
the last
didn't
time you,
let him?
in addition to that, all right, if it look, I'm reaching my limit. If he just keeps over talking, let's just fucking mute his ass. We'll just like fuck. We don't need the John Lee show. In addition to that, once you found out that it was Alex, you did pull up a chair and let him fucking like, give a lecture. And you were more submissive and demure, right?
Is it the last time?
Very demure.
Just go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's funny. He was just pulling his I reject your claim, I reject your premise, I reject the blah. But can he articulate why he rejects any of these things?
No.
No. He's got nothing. Just think if he can just say nuh-uh. I mean, you can. Stick your head in the sand.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
You're like the epitome of anti-intellectualism.
Yeah. John's garbage.
Did you like the part where I said thank you for your time?
I didn't even notice.
I didn't even notice that. I mean, it would just be like more faux civility. I mean, something.
Fucking noise coming out of your face.
You think my appreciation was insincere?
Yeah. Anybody object to John being text muted?
Nope.
Oof. Wow.